My name is Carol, I'm 65, and I was having a heart attack on my kitchen floor when my only son told me he was too busy to help, then hung up on me. Before I tell you how I systematically erased him from my life and my inheritance, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. The cold of the linoleum floor was the first thing I really felt. It seeped through my thin housecoat, a deep, unforgiving chill that went right to my bones. My left arm was completely numb, a useless weight pinned beneath me, and a crushing pressure was building in my chest, like a cinder block was sitting right on my ribs. Through the speaker of the phone pressed against my cheek, I could hear a world that wasn't mine anymore. Laughter, the clinking of wine glasses, faint background music from some party I wasn't at. "David," I managed to get out, and my own voice sounded strange, like it was coming from a great distance. "David, honey, I think something's wrong." His voice, when it came, was bright and a little impatient. The voice he used when I was interrupting something important. "Mom? What is it?" "I don't know," I rasped, the pressure in my chest tightening its grip. I fell. My arm." His tone shifted, not to concern but to pure irritation. I could picture him perfectly, standing on a patio somewhere, a drink in his other hand, rolling his eyes. "Mom, it's Jessica's birthday," he said, the words clipped and sharp. "We literally just sat down for dinner with her parents. You know how they are. Can I please try to call you back tomorrow?" Tomorrow. The word hung in the air between us. Tomorrow felt like a century away. I wasn't sure I had another 5 minutes. "No," I whispered, fighting for every breath. "David, please. I think I need an ambulance." There was a pause. A heavy, loaded silence where I could hear him sigh. He actually sighed. "Mom, are you being serious?" he asked, his voice laced with disbelief, as if I'd call him with a prank while my world was ending. "Yes," I breathed. It was the only word I could manage. And then he said it. The 7 words that shattered the last 40 years of my life. The words that changed everything. "Then just call 911, Mom. That's what they're for." And then click. The line went dead. He hung up. He didn't ask where the pain was. He didn't ask if I was alone. He just disconnected. He left me in a silence that was louder than any scream. It hadn't started like this. The day had started so normal. The sun had streamed through the kitchen window just a few hours earlier. I was folding laundry, old towels, my worn-out gardening jeans, and a small pile of his things, a few faded t-shirts from college he'd never bothered to come back and collect. I found myself smoothing the wrinkles out of a gray Ohio State shirt, my hands moving in the familiar, loving way they always had. A mother's habit. The pain began around noon. Just a strange ache in my chest, like bad indigestion. I ignored it. At 65, you get used to aches and pains. You tell yourself you're fine because you've spent a lifetime putting yourself second. So I kept going. I decided to make soup. Chicken noodle with extra dill, his favorite. Not Jessica's. She'd once wrinkled her nose and said it smelled old-fashioned. But I made it anyway. I had a container in the fridge waiting for him, left over from last week when he'd promised to stop by and never did. I was pouring a fresh bowl for my own lunch when the pressure in my chest suddenly intensified. It wasn't an ache anymore, it was a vice. My vision swam. The heavy ceramic bowl, the one I'd bought on a trip with his father years ago, slipped through my trembling fingers. It hit the floor with a sickening crack, shattering into a dozen pieces. The golden soup splashed across the white linoleum, and then I dropped with it. The impact knocked the wind out of me. Cold tile, a faint stickiness from the spilled soup. I tried to push myself up, but my left arm wouldn't respond. It was just there. Panic, cold and sharp, lanced through me. My legs wouldn't work. I was a prisoner in my own body. But my right hand could still move. Inch by inch, my fingers straining, I dragged myself across the floor until my fingertips brushed against my cell phone on the rug, just inside the living room. My vision was blurry, but I managed to unlock it. I didn't even think. My thumb went straight to his name at the top of my favorites list. David. Now, lying in the ruins of my kitchen, in the deafening silence he had left me in, my body felt like it was shutting down. The pressure in my chest was unbearable. The world was narrowing, the edges of my vision turning dark and fuzzy. My hand, still holding the phone, trembled violently. I could feel my consciousness slipping away, like a tide going out, As the world faded to black, one thought echoed in my mind, clear as a bell in the encroaching darkness. He had left me on the floor to die. The first thing I remember after the darkness was the smell. Antiseptic and bleach so sharp it made my eyes water. Then came the sounds, the rhythmic, gentle beep of a machine next to my head, the squeak of soft-soled shoes on tile, and the murmur of voices just outside my door. I blinked, and the blurry shapes above me slowly sharpened into white ceiling tiles under the harsh glare of fluorescent lights. I was in a hospital. A nurse with kind eyes and a tired smile noticed I was awake. "Welcome back, Carol," she said softly, checking the drip in my arm. "You gave us a bit of a scare. You're at Miami Valley Hospital. The paramedics brought you in. Do you remember what happened?" I tried to speak, but my throat was dry. I just nodded. Oh, I remembered. I remembered every last soul-crushing second. She bustled around checking my vitals, asking me questions in a calm, practiced voice. "Any allergies to medications?" "No." "When was your last meal?" "Lunchtime soup." The word tasted like ash in my mouth. "And who is your emergency contact, dear?" The question hung in the air. For a moment my mind went blank, refusing to form the name. But habit is a powerful thing. "My son," I said, the words feeling like a betrayal to myself. "David. David Decker." She wrote it down on her clipboard. "And his number?" As I recited the 10 digits I knew better than my own, the memory of the phone call came rushing back, not as a memory, but as a physical sensation. I could feel the cold of the floor again, hear the party in the background, feel the crushing weight in my chest, and above all hear the finality of that click as he hung up. He hadn't just ended a call. He had severed a lifeline. The nurse left, and I was alone with the beeping machine. I stared at the blank television screen across the room, but I wasn't seeing my reflection. I was seeing a highlight reel of the last 40 years. I saw myself at 25, turning down a big job interview in Columbus because a 5-year-old David had come down with a bad case of the chickenpox and was crying for his mommy. I saw myself at 38, quietly withdrawing the money I'd been saving for a trip to Europe from my teacher's salary, putting it into an envelope to pay off a secret gambling debt he'd tearfully confessed to, a debt he swore would ruin his life. He never paid a dime of it back. I saw myself at 50, sitting on his bed in his first apartment, listening for hours as he cried because Jessica, his new girlfriend, was threatening to leave. I talked him through it, told him he was a good man, helped him draft the apology text. I was always there. The fixer. The emotional janitor. The bank. The unconditional, unending, one-woman support system. And what was my reward? "Can I try to call you back tomorrow?" Lying in that sterile hospital bed, a profound and terrible clarity began to settle over me. This wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a single bad judgment call in the middle of a loud party. It was the culmination of 1,000 tiny cuts, 1,000 moments where my needs were dismissed, my sacrifices taken for granted. He hadn't just forgotten me in a moment of crisis. He had been forgetting me piece by piece for years. He just finally said it out loud. A wave of something hot and powerful surged through me, stronger than any medication in my four. It wasn't sadness. It was rage. A pure, cold, clarifying rage. It burned away the fog of maternal excuses I'd been living in for decades. He didn't mean it. He's just stressed. He loves me, he's just busy. All of it gone. Replaced by the stark, ugly truth. My son, the center of my universe, had weighed my life against a birthday dinner, and decided the dinner was more important. The anger wasn't hot and loud. It was a cold, quiet certainty, and it was demanding a reckoning. And in that sterile, lonely room, as the machine next to me beeped out the steady rhythm of a heart he had so easily discarded, I began to draft the terms of surrender. His surrender, not mine. The next morning, a doctor with a kind face and a clipboard came in. He had the gentle, reassuring air of someone who delivered bad news for a living. "Good morning, Mrs. Decker," he said, pulling up a chair. "I'm Dr. Evans. We've been monitoring you overnight. It seems you had an episode of atrial fibrillation, likely brought on by severe stress. Your heart went into an irregular rhythm. We have it under control now with medication, but we'll need to keep you for another day or two for observation." He continued explaining the treatment, the follow-up appointments, the lifestyle changes. Then he delivered the final unintentionally ironic line. The most important thing for you right now, Carol, is to rest. And you absolutely must reduce the amount of stress in your life. Reduce stress. I almost laughed out loud. The sound that came out was more like a dry croak. Reduce stress? I had spent 40 years acting as a human stress absorber for my son. I'd absorbed the stress of his failed business ventures, his tumultuous relationship with Jessica, the bills he couldn't pay from a salary he spent too freely. I was a walking, talking sponge for his anxieties, his mistakes, his responsibilities. Telling me to reduce stress was like telling a dam to stop holding back water. But as I looked at the doctor, I realized he was right. I did need to reduce stress. And in that moment, I knew exactly which source of stress I had to eliminate. It was a single massive 200-pound source named David. When the doctor left, I pressed the call button for the nurse. The same kind woman from the night before came in. "What can I do for you, dear?" "I need two things," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "A pen and a piece of paper." She brought them to me on a small tray. I propped myself up against the pillows. The paper was just a blank discharge instruction sheet, but to me it felt like the Declaration of Independence. My hand was a little shaky, but my resolve was solid steel. I wrote down 3 items. 1. Call lawyer Miller. 2. Review all joint accounts/automatic payments. 3. No visitors. Especially David Decker. I stared at the last line. It felt both terrifying and liberating. I handed the paper to the nurse. "Could you please put this note in my file? Effective immediately. No visitors unless I explicitly approve them." I looked her right in the eye. "Especially not my son." She didn't flinch. She didn't ask questions or give me a pitying look. She just nodded, a flicker of understanding in her eyes. "Of course, Carol. I'll take care of it right away." After she left, I picked up my cell phone from the bedside table. I ignored the single missed call notification from my sister. My thumb went straight to my contacts and I found the number for my family lawyer, Arthur Miller, the man who had handled my husband's will and set up my estate. He answered on the second ring. "Arthur Miller speaking." "Arthur, it's Carol Decker." "Carol, good to hear from you, though I hope everything is all right." "It is now," I said, and the words felt truer than anything I'd said in years. "Arthur, I need to make some immediate changes to my will. And my trust." There was a slight pause on his end. "Of course. Do you want my assistant to schedule an appointment for next week?" "No," I said, cutting him off, but my tone was calm, almost surgical. "I want to do it now, over the phone if possible. I want to remove a name from my will entirely. And I need to cancel all future trust distributions linked to that individual. Effective immediately." I could hear the faint sound of him tapping on a keyboard. He was a professional. He didn't ask why. He didn't ask if I was sure. He simply asked, "And which name would you like to remove, Carol?" I took a deep breath. "David. My son. David Allen Decker." When I hung up with my lawyer a few minutes later, after he had confirmed the process was in motion and the paperwork would be sent over, a wave of calm I hadn't felt in decades washed over me. It was done. The first, most important step. David was celebrating his wife's birthday, completely oblivious to the fact that his future, his financial safety net, his entire inheritance, had just been wiped from existence with a single quiet phone call. He just didn't know it yet. 2 days later, a taxi dropped me off in front of my own house. The driver, a kind young man, helped me with my small overnight bag, but I insisted on walking up the front steps by myself. Each step was a small victory. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The house was silent, exactly as I had left it. And there on the kitchen floor was the evidence of the moment my life split in two: the dried, sticky puddle of chicken soup and the scattered, jagged pieces of the broken bowl. I stood there for a long time just looking at it. It wasn't just a mess. It was a metaphor. For my entire life. All the years I had spent cleaning up his messes, the emotional messes, the financial messes. This time I had literally made the mess myself, but it was because of him. And just like always, I was the one left to clean it up. "Not anymore," I whispered to the empty house. Slowly, methodically, I got down on my hands and knees. I picked up each piece of broken ceramic and placed it in a trash bag. I scrubbed the dried soup from the linoleum until the floor gleamed. Then I stood up, washed my hands, and felt a profound sense of finality. I wasn't just cleaning a floor. I was closing a chapter. I made myself a cup of chamomile tea and sat down at the kitchen table with my laptop. The list I'd made in the hospital was beside me. Call lawyer Miller. Done. I moved on to the next item. Review all joint accounts/automatic payments. My fingers flew across the keyboard. I logged into my online banking portal. It was sickening to see it all laid out in black and white. There it was, the automatic $1,500 monthly transfer to his checking account, labeled Rent Help. The access he had to my emergency savings account, just in case. The credit card I'd co-signed for him years ago, which always seemed to carry a balance. Click. The monthly transfer was canceled. The confirmation box popped up. Are you sure you want to cancel this recurring payment? I clicked yes with a firm, satisfying tap. Click. His access to the savings account was revoked. This action is irreversible online. Please contact a bank representative if you wish to reinstate access. Good. Click. I navigated to the credit card site and froze the account, reporting the co-signed card as lost. A new one would be sent to me and only me. In the span of 15 minutes, I had dismantled the entire financial scaffolding that had been propping up his comfortable life. It wasn't revenge fueled by rage. It felt more like surgery. A necessary, precise amputation to save my own life. I was just closing the laptop when I heard it. A car door slamming outside. Footsteps on the porch. Then a knock on the door. I didn't even have to look. I knew. He was always a day late and $1 short. I walked to the door and looked through the peephole. There he was. David. Holding a ridiculously large bouquet of white lilies. My favorite. A fact he'd trot out whenever he was in trouble. He had that forced, placating smile on his face, the one he used on Jessica's parents, not on me. He knocked again, a little louder this time. I took a breath, turned the deadbolt, and opened the door just a few inches, leaving the chain on. His smile faltered for a second when he saw the chain. Mom, he said, trying to recover his cheerful tone. Hey, I came as soon as I could. I brought you flowers. He held them out. I didn't move to take them. I just looked at him. He cleared his throat, his smile straining. You look okay. Better. I was so worried. Why didn't you text me or anything? Worried. He was worried. The man who hung up on me while I was potentially dying on the floor now wanted to know why I didn't text? The sheer audacity of it was breathtaking. I almost laughed. I'm not taking visitors today, David, I said. My voice was quiet, but it was as solid as the oak door between us. He blinked, confused. What? Mom, I came all the way over here. Let me in. I didn't ask you to, I replied. His face finally shifted from confusion to the familiar look of annoyance. The real David was showing up. Okay, you're being dramatic now, he scoffed. That word. Dramatic. My blood ran cold. It was his go-to weapon. When I asked him to call more than once a month, I was being dramatic. When I told him Jessica's sarcastic comments hurt my feelings, I was being dramatic. When I was lying on the floor having a heart attack, I was apparently being dramatic. No, I said, my voice dropping even lower, colder. I'm being clear. I started to close the door. His hand shot out to stop it, his fingers pressing against the wood. So that's it? You're just shutting me out now. I looked at his hand, then back at his face. Yes, I said. I left the flowers on the doormat like a pathetic tribute at a funeral. I closed the door, slid the deadbolt home with a decisive thunk, and didn't look back. But I could feel it in my bones. This was far from over. This was only the first shot fired in a war he had started. For 3 days there was silence. Blessed, wonderful silence. I had half expected him to start blowing up my phone, but I should have known better. David's primary method of dealing with discomfort was to ignore it until it went away, assuming I would eventually be the one to cave and clean up the mess. That was his pattern. He'd create a problem, then disappear until I fixed it, and welcomed him back with open arms and a hot meal. But the locks on my heart had been changed, and I wasn't opening them. On the 4th morning, the doorbell rang. Not a polite knock, but a series of sharp, insistent presses. Ding dong, ding dong, ding dong. It had an air of entitlement to it. I walked to the door, my heart beating steadily this time, and looked through the peephole. It was Jessica. Her arms were crossed tightly over her chest, and her perfectly glossed lips were pressed into a thin, angry line. I took a deep breath and opened the door, again leaving the chain on. "Hi, Jessica," I said calmly. She tried to plaster on a sweet smile, but it didn't reach her cold eyes. "Carol, can we please talk? I think this has all gone a bit too far." She made a move to step forward, expecting me to unlatch the door. I didn't move. "I'm listening," I said, my voice neutral. Her smile vanished. "Look, David's a wreck," she said, dropping the pretense. "He feels absolutely terrible about what happened. He's barely slept. He just didn't understand how serious it was." A wreck. He was a wreck. I thought about me alone, dialing his number with trembling fingers. I thought about lying on the cold floor, listening to the silence after he hung up. I thought about the anonymous ceiling tiles of the hospital room. I said nothing. She took my silence as an invitation to continue, her voice taking on a lecturing tone. "You know, families fight. Things are said. You don't just cut people off over one bad moment. It's not healthy." "One bad moment?" The words escaped my lips before I could stop them. They were quiet but sharp. She clearly didn't like being questioned. Her posture stiffened. "Yes, one bad moment. He was at my birthday party, for goodness sake. His mind was elsewhere. You can't hold that against him forever." My mind flashed back through a catalog of bad moments. I remembered the time she'd come over for Thanksgiving and loudly whispered to David, loud enough for me to hear, that my stuffing was a bit soggy and my gravy was lumpy. David had just given a weak, apologetic shrug. I remembered the baby blanket I had spent weeks knitting for their first child, only to overhear Jessica telling her mother on the phone that it was tacky and old-fashioned, and that she'd be putting it in the back of a closet. David had been right there and said nothing. I remembered every sarcastic comment, every thinly veiled insult, every single time he had stood by silently and let her disrespect me in my own home. "Are you finished?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. She blinked, taken aback. "Excuse me. You came here to deliver a speech on his behalf," I stated, not asked. "You didn't come here to ask how I am. You didn't come to apologize for your husband's actions. You came here to manage the situation and make your own life less uncomfortable. I've done enough listening for one lifetime." Her mouth opened, then closed. She looked genuinely stunned that I wasn't just rolling over. "Well, I never," she started to say, her face flushing with anger. "No," I said, cutting her off. "I suspect you haven't." And with that, I slowly and deliberately closed the door in her face. There was no slam, no yelling. Just the soft click of the latch, followed by the decisive slide of the deadbolt. Silence. But this time it was a silence of my own making. It was the sound of peace. As I locked the door on her sputtering rage, I heard her mutter something vile under her breath on the other side. It was quiet, but I heard it clear as day through the wood. "You'll regret this, you manipulative old hag." And I knew the gloves were officially off. I thought the worst was over. I thought that after the direct confrontations, they might just retreat and leave me in peace. How naive I was. What happened next was far more insidious, far more damaging than a shouted insult on my doorstep. They stopped trying to break down my door, and instead started trying to poison the well. It began subtly. A phone call from my younger sister Jean, who lives out in Arizona. Usually, our calls were light and full of gossip about her grandkids. This time, her voice was strained. "Carol, are you feeling okay?" she asked, a weird hesitation in her voice. "I'm fine, Jean. Why do you ask?" "Well," she said, and I could hear her twisting the phone cord. "I just got off the phone with Jessica. She called, said she was terribly worried about you." My blood ran cold. "Worried? What did she say?" "Just that you had a bit of a health scare, and that you haven't been yourself since. She said you're not taking their calls, and that you've been, well, she used the word erratic. She said you're making some rash decisions about your finances and that David is just heartbroken, trying to figure out how to help you." I felt like the air had been punched out of my lungs. It was brilliant in a sickening sort of way. They weren't telling people the truth. They were crafting a new narrative, a story where I wasn't a victim reclaiming her power, but a confused, unstable old woman having a mental breakdown. They were the concerned, loving children, and I was the problem that needed to be managed. "Jean," I said, my voice shaking with a fury I had to control, That is not what happened. I told her the truth. The whole story. The phone call, the hospital, the years of being taken for granted. To her credit, my sister was horrified. But the seed of doubt had been planted. Well, it's just so unlike you, she kept saying, which I knew was code for, this sounds crazy. The next blow came a few days later. I was getting my mail when my next-door neighbor, a sweet woman named Linda who I'd traded gardening tips with for years, gave me a strange, pitying look. Everything all right over there, Carol? She asked, her head tilted. We saw Jessica's car here the other day. She seemed quite upset when she left. I just nodded and gave a weak smile. Just a family disagreement, Linda. You know how it is. But I could see in her eyes that Jessica had likely given her an earful, probably some sob story about my difficult behavior. The smear campaign was in full swing. They were systematically turning my own support system against me. They were painting a picture of me as ungrateful, mentally fragile, and cruel. Jessica called my cousin in Florida. David apparently had a heart-to-heart with our pastor, expressing his deep concern for my spiritual and mental well-being. They were trying to isolate me, to make me doubt my own sanity. And for a dark, terrifying moment, it almost worked. Late one night, sitting alone in my quiet house, I found myself wondering, am I the one who's crazy? Am I being too harsh? Am I destroying my own family? The guilt, so expertly wielded by them for years, began to creep back in. But then I remembered the cold floor. I remembered the sound of the dial tone. I remembered the words, "Just call 911. That wasn't a misunderstanding. That was a choice. My son had made a choice, and his wife was now choosing to help him escape the consequences by trying to destroy my reputation. No, I wasn't crazy. I was awake. For the first time in a very long time, I was wide awake. They thought they could isolate me, paint me as the crazy old woman in the house on the corner. But they underestimated me. They had no idea I was about to find an army of my own. The first sign that their strategy was backfiring came about a week later. It was the first of the month. Rent day. I was sitting in my newly peaceful kitchen, enjoying the morning sun when my phone, which had been blissfully silent, began to buzz. It was a number I didn't recognize. I let it go to voicemail. A minute later it buzzed again. Another voicemail. And again. And again. After the fourth call, curiosity got the better of me. I opened my voicemail app. The transcription started popping up on the screen. The first one was from David. Voicemail 1. Mom, hey, it's me. Listen, something weird is going on with the bank. The usual rent transfer didn't go through. Can you check on it? My landlord is getting antsy. Call me back. His voice was casual, just a hint of annoyance. I moved to the next one, left just 10 minutes later. Voicemail 2. Mom, it's me again. I just tried to use the emergency card for groceries and it was declined. What is going on? Did you cancel the cards? This isn't funny. Call me. Now. The casual tone was gone, replaced by a sharp, demanding edge. I smiled a little and moved to the third. This one came an hour after the second. Voicemail 3. Carol, it's David. I've been calling you all morning. I just got off the phone with the bank. They said my access to the savings account has been revoked. They said you revoked it. What the hell are you doing? You can't just do that. You know we rely on that. Jessica is freaking out. You need to call me back and fix this right now. The mask had completely slipped. This was the real David. Entitled, panicked, and furious that his cash machine had suddenly stopped working. But the fourth voicemail was the masterpiece. It was a long, rambling 2-minute message filled with a cocktail of self-pity, blame, and threats. Voicemail 4. Sounding breathless and panicked. Mom, are you seriously doing this? Over one stupid phone call? One misunderstanding? After everything I've done for you? I can't believe this. Jessica's parents had to lend us money for rent. Do you know how humiliating that is? You're destroying my marriage. She's saying this is all my fault for not having a better job, for relying on my mommy's inheritance. Her words, not mine. You're trying to ruin my life. You have to fix this. If you don't put that money back, I don't know what I'm going to do. We're going to get evicted. Is that what you want? For your only son and his family to be out on the street? Is it? I listened to it twice. It was incredible. In all of those messages, in all of that panicked rambling, there was not a single "I'm sorry." Not one "I was wrong." Not one "How are you feeling?" It was all about him. His rent. His humiliation. His marriage. His problems. I wasn't a person to him. I was a resource. And now that the resource was cut off, he was in a full-blown panic. I calmly deleted all 4 voicemails. The silence that followed was music to my ears. For years, his problems had been my problems. His emergencies had been my emergencies. But as I sat there in my sun-drenched kitchen, I realized with a profound sense of relief that they weren't mine anymore. They were his. And for the first time in his adult life, he was going to have to figure them out on his own. But just as I was putting my phone down, it buzzed one last time. A new voicemail. The transcription popped up. This one wasn't from David. It was from Jessica. Her voice dripping with venom. "We know what you're doing, you vindictive witch," the transcription read. "And we're not just going to sit here and take it. You're going to hear from our lawyer." A lawyer? I almost laughed. It was such a classic Jessica move. An empty threat designed to intimidate me into submission. They didn't have money for rent, but they were going to hire a lawyer? Please. I dismissed it as the desperate flailing of 2 spoiled children who had just had their allowance cut off. I was wrong. It wasn't an empty threat. Exactly 1 week later, the mailman delivered a crisp, oversized envelope. It was from a law firm I'd never heard of, Patterson, Croft & Associates. The paper felt thick and expensive in my hands. My stomach clenched. This was real. I sat down at my kitchen table, my hands trembling slightly as I used a letter opener to slice open the envelope. Inside was a 3-page letter, filled with dense legal jargon. But I didn't need a law degree to understand the gist of it. It was a formal cease and desist letter. But it wasn't telling me to stop contacting them. It was accusing me. I read the key paragraph 3 times, convinced my eyes were deceiving me. "It has come to our attention that you, Mrs. Carol Decker, have engaged in a pattern of behavior constituting a form of reverse elder abuse and malicious financial coercion against our clients, Mr. and Mrs. David Decker. You have abruptly and without warning withdrawn long-standing financial support, which our clients had come to reasonably rely upon, causing them extreme emotional distress and financial hardship. This action, taken in what appears to be a punitive and emotionally manipulative manner following a minor family disagreement, is unacceptable. Reverse elder abuse." The words seemed to jump off the page and slap me across the face. They were accusing me of abusing them. They were twisting my act of self-preservation into a crime. The letter went on to claim that my actions had jeopardized David's mental health, put a severe strain on his marriage, and that I was using my financial power to inflict emotional pain. It was a masterpiece of gaslighting. A work of fiction so audacious it was almost impressive. They had taken the truth and turned it completely inside out. They weren't the neglectful son and the greedy daughter-in-law. No, they were the victims. I was the wealthy, manipulative matriarch, pulling the purse strings to punish her loving children. The letter concluded with a list of demands. I was to immediately reinstate the monthly rent payment. I was to restore David's access to the emergency savings account. And I was to agree to attend mandatory family counseling sessions with a therapist of their choosing. If I did not comply with these demands within 10 business days, they would be forced to explore all available legal options, including filing a lawsuit to seek damages for emotional distress, and to petition the court for a financial conservatorship based on your recent erratic behavior. A conservatorship. They were threatening to take legal control of my finances, my life, based on the narrative they had invented about my instability. They weren't just trying to get the money back. They were trying to break me, to strip me of my autonomy and put me back in the box they had designed for me. I read the letter twice, my hands shaking not with fear, but with a white-hot rage I had never known. The initial shock gave way to an icy calm. This was no longer just about a son who had failed his mother. This was about a calculated, malicious attack on my character, my sanity, and my freedom. They had pushed me, and now they had made a fatal miscalculation. They had documented their own greed and cruelty in writing. They thought this letter was a weapon to be used against me. Oh, they had just handed me the very sword I needed to end this. My hands were steady as I picked up the phone. I didn't hesitate. I didn't need to think. I knew exactly who to call. Arthur Miller's office. It's Carol Decker for Mr. Miller. It's urgent. Within 30 seconds, Arthur was on the line. Carol? What's wrong? I sound angry, Arthur, I said, my voice low and controlled. And I have every right to be. I'm forwarding you an email right now. It's a scan of a letter I just received from a law firm representing my son. I heard the ping of an email notification on his end. Okay, I'm opening it now, he said. I waited in silence as he read. The silence stretched for a full minute. I could hear the faint rustle of paper. Then I heard a sound I did not expect. A short, sharp bark of laughter. Oh, for heaven's sake, he finally said, a note of disbelief in his voice. Carol, this is the most amateurish, desperate piece of legal posturing I have seen in my 30 years of practice. Reverse elder abuse? A conservatorship? This is garbage. A wave of relief washed over me, so potent it almost made my knees weak. So they don't have a case? A case, he scoffed. They don't have a prayer. An adult child has absolutely no legal right to an inheritance or financial support from a parent. Relying on your generosity is not a legally protected status. This letter is pure intimidation. It's a bluff, Carol. And we are going to call it. What do we do? I asked, feeling the strength flood back into me. We do two things, Arthur said, his voice now all business. First, I am going to draft a response to this. Patterson, Croft and Associates. It will be polite, professional, and it will inform them in no uncertain terms that their claims are baseless and defamatory. I will also be including a gentle reminder about the legal penalties for filing frivolous lawsuits. Second, I am going to draft a formal cease and desist letter of our own, to be served to both David and Jessica. It will demand they immediately stop all forms of contact with you. Phone calls, texts, in-person visits, and cease their campaign of slander against you among family and friends. If they violate it, we'll pursue a restraining order. Yes, I said. Do it. Consider it done, he replied. They picked a fight with the wrong woman, Carol. After I hung up, I felt like a general preparing for battle. The fear and rage had been forged into something new. Resolve. But Arthur's letter was only the first part of my counteroffensive. I wasn't just going to defend. I was going to fortify. The next morning, a van from Dayton Lock and Key was parked in my driveway. A kind, burly man named Gus changed every single lock on my house in under an hour. He handed me a set of shiny new keys that no one else in the world had a copy of. Next, I called a home security company. The day after that, 2 young technicians installed a state-of-the-art system, complete with motion sensor lights and small, discrete cameras covering my front porch and back door. That evening, I sat on my sofa and looked at the live feed on my phone. The image of my own quiet, empty front porch filled the screen. For the first time since this whole nightmare began, I felt a sliver of safety. My home was no longer just a house. It was a fortress. And the drawbridge was up. I knew they would receive Arthur's letter soon. I knew their desperation and anger would likely escalate. I had a nagging feeling they weren't done trying to break me. And I was right. The legal letters and security systems created a fragile perimeter of peace, but inside I felt worn down. The constant state of alert, the emotional turmoil, it was exhausting. I had spent so many years wrapped up in David's life that I had let my own friendships wither. I felt isolated, adrift in my own fortified house. One Tuesday, staring at the same 4 walls, I decided to do something I hadn't done in nearly 5 years. My old book club, a group of women I'd taught with for decades, still met on the first Tuesday of the month at a local library. I hadn't gone since my husband passed, using David and his family as an excuse to stay home. Not anymore. Walking into that library meeting room felt like stepping into a foreign country. A few faces had changed, but the core group was still there. I saw a few curious glances, a few whispered exchanges. The smear campaign had clearly reached some of them. For a moment, I almost turned around and left. But then a familiar face broke through the crowd. It was Margaret, my best friend from my teaching days. A sharp, no-nonsense woman with a wicked sense of humor. She marched right up to me, ignoring the whispers, and wrapped me in a fierce hug. "Carol Decker, as I live and breathe," she said, pulling back to look me in the eye. "It's about damn time you showed your face around here." Tears pricked my eyes. It's good to see you, Margaret. I've been hearing things, she said, her voice dropping lower as she led me to a quiet corner. Nonsense. Garbage about you not being well. I got a very strange, concerned phone call from that daughter-in-law of yours last week. I knew it was a load of bull the second I heard her voice. So you tell me, what's really going on? And for the first time I told someone the entire story from start to finish. I didn't hold back. I told her about the cold floor, the dead phone line, the lawyer's letter, the lies. I laid it all out, the ugly, painful truth. She listened without interrupting, her expression growing harder and angrier with every word. When I finished, she took my hand in hers. Her grip was surprisingly strong. That ungrateful little brat, she said, her voice a low growl. And that venomous wife of his. Carol, I am so sorry. I am so sorry you went through that alone. I just feel so isolated. I admitted, my voice cracking. Not anymore, you're not, she said firmly. Listen to me. You are one of the strongest people I know. You raised that boy on your own after Bill died. You put him through college. You gave him everything. What he did is unforgivable. She squeezed my hand. You're not alone in this. We're on your side. And just like that, something inside me shifted. The validation, the unwavering belief from someone who truly knew me, was like a healing balm on a raw wound. During the book discussion, I felt the other women slowly warming up to me, asking me questions, including me in the conversation. They had heard the rumors, but seeing me there, talking and laughing with Margaret, they chose to believe their own eyes over Jessica's poison. Leaving the library that evening, I felt lighter than I had in months. I had walked in feeling like a lonely outcast and walked out feeling like I had an army at my back. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was rediscovering a life and a version of myself that I had put on hold for far too long. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time I felt hope. But I knew one final test, one last confrontation was still to come. The cease and desist letter from Arthur worked like a charm. The calls stopped. The texts stopped. The angry voicemails from Jessica were a thing of the past. The silence was deep and for the most part peaceful. The legal threat had apparently been enough to send them scurrying back into the shadows. But I knew David. I knew his patterns. He wouldn't fight with logic or law. His final weapon was always emotion. His last resort was always guilt. It happened on a rainy Sunday afternoon, about 2 weeks after the letter had been served. My security camera sent a notification to my phone. Motion detected at your front door. I opened the app and watched the live feed. There he was. Alone. He wasn't angry this time. He just looked broken. He was drenched from the rain, his hair plastered to his forehead. He wasn't holding flowers. He was just standing there, looking at my front door like a lost child. He raised a hand and knocked softly, a pathetic little tap tap tap. Against my better judgment, I went to the door. I didn't open it. I spoke through the closed door, my voice clear and steady. What do you want, David? You're not supposed to be here. His voice came back, muffled and thick with emotion. Mom, please. Just for a minute. I need to talk to you. Please. I thought about it for a long moment. Was this a trick? A trap? But something in his voice sounded different. It sounded like genuine despair. With a sigh, I unbolted the door and opened it, leaving the chain on. The man standing on my porch was almost unrecognizable. His eyes were red-rimmed and puffy. He looked like he hadn't slept in a week. Mom! He choked out, tears welling in his eyes. I'm so sorry. I am so sorry. He started to sob, great gulping sobs that shook his whole body. I made a mistake, Mom. The biggest mistake of my life. I was an idiot. I was selfish. I don't know what I was thinking. He wiped his eyes with the back of his wet sleeve. Jessica, she left me. She said she couldn't be with a man who couldn't provide for her. A man who got cut off from his family. She packed her bags last night and went back to her parents. She's talking about divorce. He looked up at me, his face a mask of misery. I've lost everything, Mom. My wife. My home. The landlord is starting eviction proceedings. I've got nothing left. I need you. Please, Mom. I'm your son. Don't you love me anymore? There it was. The final performance. The ultimate guilt trip. A few months ago, this display would have shattered my resolve. The old Carol would have unchained the door, wrapped him in a hug, and told him everything would be okay. She would have transferred the money, called the landlord, and started cleaning up his newest, biggest mess. But I wasn't the old Carol anymore. I looked at him, really looked at him. I saw the tears, I heard the desperation. But I also saw the subtle calculation behind his eyes. He wasn't sorry for what he did. He was sorry for the consequences. He was sorry his wife had left him and his comfortable life was collapsing. He wasn't crying for me, he was crying for himself. And as I watched him, I saw it. Just for a fraction of a second, as he looked past me into the warm, dry house behind me, his expression shifted. The desperate grief vanished, and in its place was a flicker of cold, hard anger. A flash of resentment that I wasn't falling for it. And then just as quickly, the mask of the broken sun was back in place. But I had seen it, and it confirmed everything. I will always love the little boy I raised, I said, my voice soft but unyielding. But I don't know the man standing in front of me. No, David. I can't help you. You don't need a mother right now. You need to learn how to be an adult. And that is a lesson I can no longer teach you. It's too late. I slowly and gently closed the door, cutting off his sputtered protest. I slid the deadbolt home. I didn't watch him walk away. I didn't need to. I knew with a certainty that settled deep in my soul that it was finally truly over. Later that night, my phone buzzed with one final text from him. It just said, "I don't even know who you are anymore." I read it, and for the first time in a very long time I genuinely smiled. I smiled because he was finally right. He didn't know who I was. And the beautiful, liberating truth was that I was only just beginning to figure that out myself. For 40 years, my identity had been David's mom. Every decision, every dollar, every spare moment had been filtered through that single lens. What does David need? What would be best for David? Now the lens was gone, and the world looked bigger, brighter, and full of possibilities that were entirely my own. The woman he didn't know was a woman who took the spare bedroom, the one that had been kept pristine with fresh sheets, just in case David and Jessica needed to stay over, and turned it into an art studio. I bought canvases and paints and started painting again for the first time since college. My first painting was terrible. My second was a little better. I didn't care. The joy was in the creation, in the vibrant mess of colors that was all mine. The woman he didn't know was a woman who reconnected with her old friends. Margaret and I started taking road trips. We drove to Asheville to see the autumn leaves. We went to Chicago to see a play. We sat in diners and drank coffee and talked for hours about books, politics, and our own futures, not our children's. We laughed until our sides hurt. I hadn't laughed like that in years. The woman he didn't know was a woman who learned to be alone without being lonely. The silence in my house was no longer an empty, aching void. It was a comfortable, peaceful presence. It was the sound of my own thoughts, the rustle of a turning page, the soft music playing on the radio. It was the sound of my own life uninterrupted. I systematically scrubbed him from my life, not with anger anymore, but with a calm sense of purpose. I took down the framed photos of him from the mantelpiece, the graduation picture, the wedding portrait where he and Jessica beamed with a happiness I now knew was built on a foundation of my money. I didn't throw them away. I packed them carefully into a box and put them in the attic. They were part of my history, but they no longer needed to be part of my present. My lawyer, Arthur, handled the final official severing. He helped me set up a new will and a new trust. My entire estate, everything my husband and I had worked our whole lives for, would now be left to my sister's children for their college fund, and to a local charity that supports art education for underprivileged kids. Felt right. It felt clean. My life isn't loud or dramatic anymore. It's quiet. It's small. And it's mine. I have my friends. I have my art. I have my peace. I became my own emergency contact, my own provider, my own hero. And it turns out I'm pretty damn good at it. Thank you so much for listening to my story all the way through. It wasn't easy to share, but I believe in the power of telling our truths. So many of us are taught to give until there's nothing left, but I'm here to tell you that you deserve to keep a piece of yourself for yourself. My question for you is this. Have you ever had a moment that forced you to completely redraw the boundaries in your life? Please share your experience in the comments below. Your story might be the one someone else needs to hear today. And if my story resonated with you, please consider giving it a thumbs up and subscribing to the channel. You are not alone, and we are all stronger together.